Cess it to experiencing God's presence daily, ladies and gentlemen. There is a divine presence that is always here, always available, and always waiting to be realized. For many, this presence remains distant, obscured by the noise of the mind and the distractions of daily life. The secret to experiencing God's presence daily is not in searching for it elsewhere, but in recognizing what has always been. When we stop looking for God as something separate and start recognizing the sacredness of this moment, we realize a profound truth. The presence of God has always been here. We were simply too busy to notice. The power of presence is the key to experiencing God's presence daily. Too often, we live trapped in the illusions of time, either dwelling in the past or anxiously anticipating the future. The human mind is conditioned to seek fulfillment in moments other than the one we are in, leading us to believe that divine connection is something to be attained later, rather than something accessible now. But the truth is, God's presence is not in the past, for the past is merely a collection of memories. It is not in the future, for the future is nothing more than an imagined possibility. The divine exists only in the eternal now, and to experience it, we must awaken to the present moment. Most people go through life without truly experiencing the now. They are physically present but mentally elsewhere, lost in thought, worry, or distraction. Yet, it is in the present moment that life unfolds where we can directly experience the reality of existence. If God is the source of all life, then His presence is not something to be sought in distant places, but something to be realized in the very experience of being here. The breath we take, the beating of our hearts, the stillness behind our thoughts, all of these are reflections of divine presence. This presence requires a shift in awareness. We must learn to step out of the constant chatter of the mind and into the deeper space of stillness. This does not mean suppressing thoughts or forcing the mind to be silent. Rather, it is about becoming aware of the thoughts without becoming lost in them. When we become the observer of the mind rather than its servant, we create space between ourselves and our thoughts, and in that space, divine presence can be felt. Nature is a powerful teacher in this regard. Consider a tree standing in stillness. It does not resist the present moment. It simply exists. The sun rises, the wind blows, the seasons change, and yet the tree remains rooted in being. It is not anxiously awaiting the future or regretting the past. It simply is. When we observe nature with full attention, we can sense a deep presence that is beyond words, a presence that is the same divine force sustaining all life. If we bring this level of awareness into our daily lives, we begin to recognize the sacredness in ordinary moments. Whether we are drinking a cup of tea, feeling the warmth of the sun on our skin, or listening to the sound of rain, these moments become pathways to divine presence when experienced with full awareness. It is not about doing something extraordinary, but about fully inhabiting each moment with a sense of deep presence. In contrast, when we live disconnected from the now, we fall into suffering. Anxiety, stress, and dissatisfaction arise when we resist the present moment, when we want something to be different than it is. But the moment we surrender to what is, rather than what we think should be, we align ourselves with a greater intelligence that is beyond the limitations of the mind. Many spiritual traditions speak of God as omnipresent, meaning that He is everywhere. But if God is everywhere, then He is here, in this very moment, waiting to be realized. The key to experiencing His presence daily is not through excessive thinking, striving, or searching. It is through simple awareness. When we quiet the mind and bring our full attention to the now, we are no longer separate from divine presence. We recognize that we have never been apart from it, only unaware of it. This realization is not something that needs to be created or achieved. It is simply remembered. God's presence is, and always has been, right here. Silence is the gateway to experiencing God's presence. In a world filled with noise, distraction, and constant mental activity, silence is often overlooked or even feared. Yet it is within silence that the deepest truths of existence reveal themselves. True silence is not merely the absence of external sound. It is the stillness within, the space between thoughts. This inner silence is where the presence of God is most deeply felt, not as an idea or a belief, but as a living reality. Most people are caught in an endless stream of mental chatter. The mind continuously generates thoughts, opinions, judgments, and memories, creating a barrier between us and the direct experience of divine presence. The more we identify with this mental noise, the more we feel separate from God. But in moments of deep silence, the mind's grip loosens and something profound emerges, a presence that has always been there but was previously unnoticed. There is a reason why many spiritual traditions emphasize silence as a path to divine connection. Mystics, saints, and sages throughout history have retreated into silence, not as an escape from life, but as a way to enter into a deeper reality. Silence allows us to listen, not with our ears, but with our entire being. In the stillness, we become aware of something greater than ourselves, something beyond the limitations of thought. To cultivate this silence, one does not need to withdraw from the world. It is not about avoiding sound or isolating oneself from life. Rather, it is about discovering the stillness that is always present beneath the noise. Even in a busy environment, even in the midst of daily activities, this silence can be accessed. It is the space within, the quiet awareness that remains unchanged despite the movements of life. A simple way to experience this is by focusing on the breath. The breath is always present, always here. By bringing attention to the natural rhythm of breathing, the mind begins to slow down and a deeper stillness emerges. In this space, thoughts may still arise, but they no longer dominate our awareness. Instead, they become like passing clouds in the vast sky of stillness. Another doorway to silence is deep listening. When we listen to the sounds around us without labeling them, without mentally commenting on them, we enter a state of pure awareness. Whether it is the sound of birds, the rustling of leaves, or the distant hum of the world, simply listening with full presence dissolves the mental barriers that separate us from the now. In this listening, we realize that silence is not empty. It is full of presence, full of life. Silence also teaches us to surrender. When we stop trying to control everything with the mind, when we stop filling every moment with thoughts and distractions, we open ourselves to something greater. In surrendering to silence, we surrender to God's presence. We stop searching and simply allow ourselves to be. And in that being, we discover that what we were looking for has been here all along. Many people fear silence because it confronts them with themselves. In silence, there is no escape from one's inner state, But this is precisely why silence is so powerful. It brings us face to face with what is real. In silence, we see beyond the illusions created by the mind and come into direct contact with the essence of life itself. Experiencing God's presence daily does not require elaborate rituals or complex practices. It requires only a willingness to be still, to listen, to rest in the silent space of awareness. The more we embrace silence, the more we realize that it is not an absence, but a presence. The presence of the divine, eternally here, eternally now. The greatest obstacle to experiencing God's presence daily is the ego. The ego is not who we truly are, but rather a mental construct, a collection of thoughts, beliefs, and identities that we have accumulated over time. It thrives on separation, on the idea of ame and emuni, creating a sense of division between ourselves and the divine. As long as we are identified with the ego, we live in a state of illusion, believing ourselves to be isolated beings rather than expressions of a greater wholeness. To experience God's presence fully, we must transcend this false self and awaken to a deeper reality. The ego is built on attachment to personal identity, to opinions, to achievements, and even to suffering. It constantly seeks validation and control, always wanting more, fearing loss, and resisting what is. This endless pursuit keeps us distracted and disconnected from the presence of God, which can only be found in stillness and surrender. The ego keeps us trapped in time, replaying past experiences or anticipating future outcomes, while divine presence exists only in the now. One of the ways the ego creates separation is through judgment. When we judge ourselves, others, or life itself, we reinforce the illusion of division. We create mental labels, good or bad, right or wrong, superior or inferior, and in doing so, we lose touch with the deeper unity that underlies all existence. But when we let go of judgment and simply observe life as it is, without resistance, a profound shift occurs. We begin to see through the eyes of awareness rather than the lens of the conditioned mind. And in this space, God's presence becomes unmistakable. Fear is another product of the ego. The ego fears loss because it believes itself to be separate and fragile. It fears the unknown because it thrives on control. But divine presence is not something to be controlled or possessed. It is something to be surrendered to. The moment we stop clinging to our personal identities and let go of the need to define ourselves, we step into a greater reality, one where fear dissolves and only presence remains. Letting go of ego does not mean rejecting or denying the self. It simply means seeing through the illusion of separateness and recognizing the deeper truth of who we are. When we stop identifying with every thought and emotion that arises, we become aware of the silent observer within, the pure consciousness that is untouched by the fluctuations of the mind. This awareness is the gateway to divine presence. It is not something we must create or achieve. It is what we already are beneath the surface of mental noise. To transcend the ego, we must practice stillness. Silence and inner observation help us see how the ego operates, how it clings to stories, how it reacts defensively, how it seeks control. The more we witness the ego in action, the less power it has over us. Instead of reacting unconsciously, we begin to respond with awareness. And in that awareness, we find freedom. Another powerful way to move beyond ego is through love, true love, not the love that is based on need or attachment, but the love that arises from deep presence, dissolves the illusion of separation. When we love without expectation, without conditions, we move beyond the ego's limited sense of self and into the vastness of divine connection. In love, we forget ourselves, and in forgetting ourselves, we find God. Experiencing God's presence daily is not about seeking something outside of ourselves. It is about removing the obstacles that prevent us from seeing what has always been here. The ego is the veil that blinds us to the divine, and the moment we see through it, we realize that we were never separate. We were never alone. God's presence was never absent. It was simply obscured by the illusions of the mind. The journey to experiencing the divine is not about adding anything new. It is about letting go of what is false so that the truth can reveal itself. Experiencing God's presence daily is not a fleeting moment or an occasional spiritual experience, but a way of living in alignment with divine truth. Many seek God in rituals, scriptures, or places of worship, yet often fail to realize that His presence is not limited to these spaces. It is in every aspect of life, in every breath, in every action, in every interaction. To experience this presence continuously, one must bring awareness and intention into daily life, aligning thoughts, words, and actions with the deeper reality of divine connection. Living in alignment with God's presence means recognizing that the sacred is not separate from ordinary life. Every moment, no matter how small or mundane, holds the potential to reveal the divine. Whether one is washing dishes, walking down the street, or having a conversation, these moments become sacred when approached with full presence and awareness. When the mind is fully engaged in the now, rather than lost in past or future concerns, every action becomes an expression of divine presence. To live in this state requires awareness of how we think, feel, and act. Many live on autopilot, allowing unconscious patterns to dictate their reactions. These patterns, often rooted in fear, judgment, or attachment, create barriers to experiencing God's presence. By becoming mindful of these patterns and choosing to act from a place of love and awareness rather than ego and reactivity, one begins to align with a deeper truth. One of the most powerful ways to live in divine alignment is through gratitude. When one cultivates gratitude, even for the smallest blessings, awareness shifts from lack to abundance. Instead of seeing life through the lens of what is missing or what could be better, one begins to see the sacredness in everything. Gratitude dissolves resistance and opens the heart to the presence of God, not as an abstract concept, but as a living reality in each moment. Compassion is another key aspect of aligning with divine presence. When one treats others with kindness, understanding, and love, the illusion of separateness fades. Every human being is an expression of the divine, and when one recognizes this, every interaction becomes an opportunity to honor that presence. Instead of seeing others through the filter of judgment, one begins to see them as part of the same divine essence. In loving others, one connects more deeply with the divine presence that flows through all. Silence and stillness are also essential in this alignment. The external world is filled with distractions, noise, and constant movement, making it easy to become disconnected from inner awareness. Taking time each day to be still, even if only for a few moments, creates space for divine presence to be felt more deeply. It is in this stillness that one can listen, not with the ears, but with the heart, to the quiet guidance that is always present. Surrender is perhaps the most profound aspect of living in alignment with divine presence. Surrender does not mean passivity or inaction, but rather a deep trust in the unfolding of life. It means letting go of the need to control every outcome and instead moving with the natural flow of existence. When one surrenders to what is, rather than resisting or struggling against life, a profound peace arises. This peace is not dependent on circumstances, but is a direct reflection of one's alignment with divine truth. Ultimately, experiencing God's presence daily is not about waiting for extraordinary moments or seeking something outside of oneself. It is about bringing awareness, gratitude, compassion, stillness, and surrender into every aspect of life. When one lives this way, there is no longer a separation between the spiritual and the ordinary. Every moment becomes an opportunity to experience the divine, not as something distant, but as the very essence of life itself. The secret to experiencing God's presence daily is not about seeking something far away, but about awakening to what is already here. It is found in the power of presence where we step out of the distractions of the mind and into the sacredness of the now. It is discovered through silence, where the noise of thought fades and the depth of divine stillness is revealed. It requires freedom from ego, letting go of the false self that creates separation and illusion. And ultimately, it is about living in alignment where every thought, word, and action becomes an expression of divine truth. God's presence is not something to be attained in the future or found only in special places. It is in the breath we take, in the stillness we embrace, in the love we give, and in the surrender to life as it unfolds. When we stop searching for God as something separate and instead recognize Him in every moment, we realize that we were never apart. The presence we longed for was always within us, waiting to be remembered. Let us walk forward with this awareness, embracing life not as a series of distractions, but as an ongoing opportunity to experience the divine. In presence, in silence, in love, and in surrender, may we awaken to the truth that God has never been absent. Only our awareness was elsewhere. And now, in this moment, we return